Hi there, this is Chris Fleming.
Tonight,
For the first time ever, we're going to be looking at my full bass guitar collection, so let's do it. So this first one I want to show you is my 2009 Warwick Corvette Standard. This is the ash model in honey violin, which was one of the colored oil finishes. Ovinkal neck, Wenge fretboard, bell brass frets. This was the last production year in Germany for the Corvette Standard before it subsequently moved to Korea. This has the MEC dynamic correction pickups in it, which I know they get a lot of hate, but I've always kept this bass stock. Tiny little necks on this last production year of the Corvette Standard, so the old Warwick baseball bat thing definitely doesn't apply here. As you can see, I've played the hell out of this bass live and recording for the last 11 years that I've had it. It is wonderful. This is a super cool one. This is a 1983 Peavey T-40. As you can see, this is the black and rosewood model, which is much more seldomly seen in the wild compared to the natural and maple version that you see most of the time. I got this from a guy who purchased it off of a dude named Steve Ripley, who's probably best known for the Kramer Ripley guitars that Eddie Van Halen played. He owned a studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma called the Church Studio, and this guy I bought it from got to tour with Steve and became acquainted with him that way. And when Steve was getting rid of some gear, he sold the bass to this individual. It's a lovely bass, well used. This is one of my most recent acquisitions. This is the Ibanez BTB 845 in Cerulean Blueburst. This is a 35-inch scale length, 19mm string spacing. It's a 5-piece neck through of walnut and maple. Came with immaculately dressed stainless steel frets, which I thought was very impressive. Bass is active with a 3-band EQ as well as a mid selector, which I loved. That's an Okume back and sides, or wings. Thin layer of swamp ash, as well as that awesome blue burl that they got going on the top. Awesome bass. This is definitely my favorite bass by my favorite brand, no less. This is my 2007 Fender Highway 1 Precision bass in transparent wine red. This is the second incarnation of the Highway 1. The pickups have been swapped with the EMG Geezer Butler, and the grease bucket tone circuit has been done away with. This is one of the earlier Fender models to have the graphite support rods in the neck, or the Posiflex, I think they call it. I put a tug bar on there just for aesthetic reasons. I added an F plate just to make it more period correct. This has gotten the shit beat out of it through years of live abuse from my dad as well as myself. This is the bass that I would grab if the house were on fire and you could only grab one. This is now my number one live bass. This is the body and electronics of a 2019 Player Series Precision bass. I put a Badass 2 and a tug bar on it. The Badass 2 came stock on the Highway 1 actually, and I loved it so much I put one on there. This is the neck off of a 2006 standard jazz bass. You're actually going to see the body of that in a second with the Player Series Precision neck on it. This thing sounds wonderful, even bare ass bone stock, and it's definitely easy on the eyes. This is a bass I've had since about 2010. This was originally a black Squier bullet bass made in Japan in 1984 in the heat of the Fujigen awesomeness. This is probably blasphemous to somebody, but it has been refinished to that really cool textury duck egg blue. The neck is still in immaculate condition. The pickups are a little bit weak, and they're probably about due for a rewind, but I have not done that yet. I have abused it, as you can see, and there is some of that original sanded down black showing through that finish there. Alright, so there is the jazz bass I mentioned earlier. The guy I got it from took the original Candy Apple Red, I think, down to this really awesome textured natural finish. He must have used a rasp or something, because it is rustic with a thin layer of poly over it. This has a set of 1962 reissue jazz bass pickups in it, I also put a Badass 2 on this bass as well, and it is a monster. So this is a special one here. This is my 2007 Squier Mike Dirnt Precision. I sprayed the original black in a flat glow-in-the-dark white. I also put a Badass 2 on this bass in about 2009 or 10. It has a Seymour Duncan SPB3 in it, rosewood fretboard. This bass I also painted the neck on as well to get kind of an interesting grainy textured kind of thing. I painted it with a brush, so you kind of have these long almost wood grain like consistency that I kind of almost compared to my Warwick. So that was kind of an experimental thing, but I have to say it worked. I've never seen it before really on another bass, and it feels awesome. Try it. So this is another really special one. This is, as far as I can tell, a 1977 Aria Pro II Rickenbacker 4001 copy. This particular one has been modified with Rickenbacker electronics. This bass was actually given to me by a guy who used to come into my work all the time. We would talk music, he knew I played, he knew I collected, and on numerous occasions he brought up that he had this really cool vintage Japanese Rick copy. And you don't see very many of those, so I was aware that this bass existed. One day he showed up out of the blue, case in hand, and he said, I want to pass this on to you. I know you're going to appreciate it. I know you're going to play it. And I think about that all the time. It was a very kind gesture. And this bass is in fantastic condition for being like 45 years old. It's just a really phenomenal early Japanese Rick copy. All right. So that is the end of my basses. I thought as a little added bonus, I would share the few really cool basses that my dad owns. This is a very early 1973 precision bass. Very heavily checked, got a million little hairline fractures all over that body. This is a very smoky bass. This was a very heavily used bass. You can tell on these 70s precisions the way that headstock lacquer starts to yellow. They were still using nitro on the headstocks, but it switched to poly on the bodies, so that's why you see those real orange headstocks on those basses. The gentleman who had played and gigged this bass for years unfortunately passed away, and this bass made its way to the used market. At one point in its life, it was strapped lefty, and somebody had scratched fret markers onto the treble side of the neck. This is a very light precision bass. It has to be probably 8 on the nose. Not typical for 70s precisions. Sounds massive, and it plays wonderfully. This is one of the best precision basses I've ever laid hands on, easily. This one has a great story attached to it. This is his 1974 Rickenbacker 4001, built in November of 74. My dad played this bass live in the 80s. He subsequently sold it in the early 90s, only to end up reconnecting with the gentleman in 2014 and buying the bass back from him for the same price. How often does that happen? This is a nice example of a 4001 that is still white after decades of use. A lot of them turn a very smoky yellow color, which this one is definitely not white, but it is a lot lighter than a lot of the 4001s I've seen of this time period. Very cool. This is the same bass you will see in Rush's music video for Anthem and Fly By Night. This is an awesome example of a vintage 4001. Okay, so last but certainly not least, this is another Fujigen bass made in Japan. This is a 77 Ibanez Silver Series jazz bass, often referred to as the lawsuit instruments. It's a little bit of a misnomer since Fender was not actually included in that lawsuit. This is essentially almost exactly what you would find in a 77 jazz bass. Spec-wise, it is damn near identical. It's very heavy. This bass sounds phenomenal. I would put this jazz bass up against any Fender jazz made in any country. It is quite heavy. This thing is probably pushing 11 pounds, maybe 10 and a half. So it is definitely a beast, which is not unlike the late 70s stuff that was going on at the time. Another great example of a Fujigen bass. You don't see a lot of these out there, but they are wonderful. So with that, I think that about does it for our little rundown for today. I think I'm going to do 6-string guitars next. I hope that was somewhat entertaining. Let me know what you think. If you want any more in-depth, any questions on any of them, let me know. All right. Peace the fuck out.